afternoon, everyone. I'm Grant Swartzwelder, President of OTA Environmental Solutions, and your host today for Oilfield Strong webinar. As we've talked about in the past, we post these on our YouTube channel. Just go on YouTube and search for OTA compression. So if you want to hear any more from Mark, or you want to pass that information to someone else, feel free to do so. We do have some good upcoming presentations. Our Oilfield Strong in February will be Jim Wright, who's Railroad Commission Commissioner for Texas. Obviously, quite a bit of regulation and budget type issues coming up that he'll be interested in. We also have one that is not going to, it's going to be taped and then we'll upload it. It's with James Kinney, who's the Secretary of the New Mexico Environmental Department. He is the head of what they call the Environmental Crimes Task Force. Going to ask him if he was meaning to get some type of response by putting the word crimes into the name of the task force. Kind of thinking he was. But today I'm really excited to have Mark Smith, who's the co-founder of CleanConnect.ai. He's got his sign in the back, so that's good, so everyone can know where to find him. He's also a host. I told him he actually hosts a podcast that is more informative and slicker than mine, which makes me sad, but you got to accept it. But fortunately, it has to do more with AI and digitization and things like that. So there is a different audience there. So, but hopefully he'll tell us more about where y'all can find that, because I think I saw several of the videos and found them very worthwhile. Today, though, we're going to talk, Mark has created a cheat sheet on Quad-O A, B, and C, and kind of offshoots of that, like the methane tax and things like that. He has a business focused on continuous monitoring. And so we're going to also discuss that and kind of look at the benefits of that as it fits into the regulation and compares to other ways of monitoring, standard LDAR, things like that. So I'm looking forward to the conversation. I think it's very timely. So Mark, welcome. Let me throw a good old softball in here and just say, you might tell everyone what CleanConnect is, .ai, and kind of what you do, and then you can either head us into Quad-O ABC, or I can head us there.
Sounds great. Hey, thanks for having me, Grant. Appreciate it. Yeah, and so CleanConnect.ai was started really in Colorado, which is where a lot of our clients are, upstream clients. And it was started because Colorado regulators were going to add a new continuous monitoring regulation. And the current way people are doing LDAR, leak detection and repair, is essentially a guy gets in a truck and goes out to a site and goes around and does an inspection with a FLIR camera, like a GF320 manual type thing. And Colorado was already doing more frequency than the rest of the EPA. Current today, Quad-O A is every 6 months. They are moving to every 3 months. Colorado is already every month is the standard. So they're doing, you got to do monthly inspections. But they were adding a new regulation, which they've done now, saying, hey, from 10 days before the drill bit hits the ground to the first 6 months of production, we want you to do continuous monitoring on that new upstream site, pre-production. And operators were like, well, how in the world am I going to do that? I can't hire enough LDAR crew guys to go do all that stuff. So that really got us into understanding regulations, unpacking them, and seeing if we could come up with a computer vision, combining our specialty cameras like OGI camera or thermal camera or optical with our software to see if we can automate a lot of that stuff. And that's what we've done. We have a whole suite. Leak detection and quantification is only one or two of the things that we do. We do a dozen other things, from liquid leak detection, tank level monitoring, fire and smoke, security, PPE detection, and more, essentially. So,
very good. Well, no, I think that's great. It's I continue to look at, and we'll save the continuous monitoring and LDAR discussion toward the end, but it always confuses me as to what the best application is. And obviously there's a lot of options, which only makes it more challenging for people to understand. So look forward to hearing that. So why don't, if you would, why don't you lead us off on Quad OB, Quad OC, kind of maybe what's about to happen to us.
Right. Okay. So I'll share my screen. So, by the way, if anybody wants a copy of this, they can go to epacheatsheet.com and get a copy of this and nice PDF and whatnot. So, essentially, what's inside this cheat sheet are sort of the definitions of what's going on, new EPA requirements, a new thing called a super emitter event, Appendix K, what some of the new things are coming up in what's everybody has to turn into the EPA emissions inventory, and then a little bit about manual versus autonomous LDAR and things like that. So where I got this, basically, I took a look at these are the different things, and inside the cheat sheet, I linked to all these, but there's the overview, the preamble, 323 pages of Quad OB, C, Appendix K. You add them all up, there's 1,438 pages, which, yes, I actually read. And I summarized them into this 16-page deal, okay? And so there was recently, in November 8th, 2022, a sort of update number 2 to this, to these new proposed regulations, okay? And that's coming up. They're currently in the process where they're accepting comments up to mid-Feb. Then they'll get all that going, and then there'll be another draft release of this. So it's getting closer to being implemented. My guess is it'll be official, November of 2023, but it backdates. So that's another key thing here, is that it's saying, hey, Quad OA is for your current EPA regs. So if you had a site that was built on or after 9/18/2015, you're subject to Quad OA. Quad OB says, hey, a new site that was built after November 15th. But now they've added this new thing called Quad OC, and they're saying, well, all right, we are going to implement some of the Quad OB regs on, and some additional things on every site built prior to November 15th. So that pretty much covers every site in existence, okay? Now, I put in here Colorado Reg 7 only because, in my observation, in my looking at this, Colorado really, I call them the R&D lab for the EPA. So everything that you've probably seen inside these new regs, Colorado had it, multiple years ahead of time. So when there are some fuzzy things that are coming up, you might say, okay, well, wait, this isn't clearly defined in these new regs. Good thing is I can look to Colorado and say, hey, what are they doing now that will probably get rolled out to the rest of the US? And by the way, we do our software. Yeah, we started in Colorado, but we're all over the US. So we understand how, the different regs in different parts of the country. But the way this is going to be rolled out is they'll codify these new rules. The states will now have a period of time where they can adopt if they do nothing, they've de facto adopted them. If they say, oh, we're doing this, all they can really do in addition is saying, we'll adopt everything you've proposed and then some. Like, they can make it harder, you can't make it soft, make it easier, okay? So here inside the cheat sheet, I start to compare different things, and I'm going to point out the key things here. So really,
and again, I think our audience is really focused on production related in Permian and New Mexico. So
yeah,
if you could focus on those particular areas.
Yeah. So New Mexico is, in particular, they came up with their own regs, okay, and in particular, they've adopted something similar to Colorado, where so I'll show you that. So think of Colorado and New Mexico would be in this final column. Okay, so currently you have to do an LDAR inspection, guy with a FLIR camera, twice a year. Now you got to go to quarterly. Okay, and the Quad OC says, hey, you get to do quarterly on all your sites, unless you can prove that their throughput is of methane is very low. Although there's some potential that this new rule, they're saying, hey, we don't even care what your methane is. You have now two types of site, simple sites and complex sites. Complex is anything beyond a wellhead, really. You got tanks, you got separators, you got all this other equipment. You're a complex site. Bingo, you get to do quarterly inspections, okay? Now, Colorado says, hey, you got to do monthly if you're within 1,000 feet, maybe 1,000 to 2,000 feet of a community. New Mexico adopted a similar thing. So the frequency goes up quite a bit if you're in close proximity to a community. There's, Colorado has this pre-production thing in here. And, really they've codified OGI. They have OGI or method 21, but OGI really is considered the best system of emission reduction. And they have the super emitter event. Now, this is a big deal, so I have a whole slide for that, okay? So further down here, let me look here at the major things here. So a gas process.
The pneumatic controllers, I know, has been really talked a lot about. You might address that, and then the loadouts. Those and tank battery, those three, I think, really.
All right. Yeah. So a couple things in here. They came out with, up till now, right? There's this guidelines about how to do a manual OGI inspection. And now they've codified it even further into a thing called Appendix K, where they get very prescriptive on, what you need to do and what the training that the operator needs to have and all that. So I will cover Appendix K a little bit, but in the second draft, they made Appendix K only deal with gas processing plants. Okay. And so they've sort of left it off to the side, but it's there, and you should understand it, because at any moment they could say Appendix K is your new modus operandi for doing an OGI inspection. Now, zero emitting pneumatics. So they're basically saying, hey, you got a new site, put some zero emitting pneumatics in. Okay. But what about your old sites? Well, we want you to retrofit all those. So I could see, the collective groan on that one, like replace all these nat gas pneumatics with zero emitting. Okay. And of course the EPA will, Colorado will adopt whatever that is. Now, the Colorado has had zero emitting pneumatics for quite a while. So a lot of the operators that we see already have that kind of stuff on them. So for them, they're like, yeah, okay, we've been doing this for a while. Okay.
I think the interesting thing there is going to be, like, we're talking to folks in New Mexico that bought marginal production, and now they're looking at having to make major CapEx to get them up and going, because from what I'm seeing, and please comment on it, they don't really, the regulators don't care whether it's making 3 barrels a day or 100 barrels a day for some of these things. I know there's some gas requirements, but
no, it used to be, in part, it was about throughput. It was about the amount of potential methane, but now it looks like they're headed toward a complex site versus a not complex site, right? You got a lot of gear on there. You got to do this. Okay. Yep. Liquid loadouts. This was something that was introduced in Colorado a few years ago, saying, hey, we want you to visually observe a liquid loadout. Okay. So, a guy shows up and is taking liquid away. And if it's 2 a.m. in the morning, you got to somehow visually look at that. Okay. So, yeah. And so here they're not saying you need to visually do it, but EPA is saying you got to provide zero emission loadouts. Why? Well, because I would say from our observation to continuous monitoring, that happens to be an emission event where a pumper truck doesn't correctly connect and it creates an emission event. And it also drives the LDAR people crazy, because even if you had sensors on there, the alert goes off. Hey, you had an emission event. You send the LDAR crew out later. They don't find anything. Why? Because the pumper truck's long gone, right? He left. That emission event came and went as intermittent. So that's why Colorado was saying, hey, I need some visual loadout, right? Tank batteries. This is New Mexico adopted something similar to Colorado. I don't know if they've announced the fines yet, but basically Colorado says, oh, you're only allowed to open that thief hatch twice a year for maintenance, and you got to give us plenty of notice, like no accidental stuff. If we catch you in a violation, it's $49,000 per violation. So we're really, really serious about this. Okay. Yeah, flare and ECD, basically no open flaring. You got to have combustors on everything, and those combustors have to be 95% efficient, eventually going to 98. And yeah, eventually you're going to have to prove it. So prove combustion efficiency by currently doing stack testing, but they're open to alternatives.
Let's talk about that, the no open flares, because obviously there is a lot of flares out there, especially, well, New Mexico, Texas, anywhere. So this eliminates all of that.
So it's basically, it's moving toward what Colorado did, was enclosed combustion devices, okay, which are a little bit different kind of a device. I don't know how they're going to, they don't really, unlike the pneumatics where they say, hey, get rid of all this and put all this new stuff in. I'm not sure how they're going to roll this out. But anyway, there is certain methods for monitoring this kind of a thing, which
I think that speaks to, for our audience, when you're putting a facilities in place, especially, usually you just slap a flare in there, and that with Quad OOOb, Quad OOOc, that might be something to consider, because you might end up basically setting yourself up to not be in compliance with the Quad OOOb and Quad OOOc if you just simply do the same thing you've been doing, which is put a flare up.
Yeah, and I imagine that's part of the whole, they'll take in there were 500,000 comments to draft number 1. There's going to be in draft number 2, they specifically were calling out certain things that they wanted comments on, which we're going to be providing comments as well. But I'll need to look into that to see if that was one of the confusing elements that people needed to dig into. But
not to be completely a smartass here, but for some reason, I'm not thinking EPA really cares about our comments. I think it's great that you and others put the comments in, but that train is going down that track, and like you say, following the Colorado mandate.
It's going down the track for sure, but they do listen to certain comments, especially, I think they're sensitive for coming up with rules that either don't make any sense or are, like way out of proportion. There's some overlying thing that, hey, there has to be some cost benefit, Yeah. This whole idea of an aim, so the alternative, this approved instrument measurement method, before EPA had this thing called, I'll call AML, which most people apply for, called the black hole. Applications go in and never come out. Colorado has this process that's difficult, and we did it and we got approved, but it's called the alternative approved instrument measurement method. And this model is going to be implemented at the EPA level. What this means, though, it's a big deal, because vendors like CleanConnect can apply, get approved, and now we're approved across an entire basin. In the case of EPA, we get approved. We're literally approved. Any operator anywhere can use our setup. And it's not just, you get approved on numerous levels, and I'll explain that more later. But let's go into what I think is one of the biggies, the super emitter event, okay? So what does this mean? It means that third-party satellites, whoever that work with the EPA, can fly over the US every day. They're looking for 100 kilogram per hour emissions, okay? It could be satellites, planes, mobile detection. So you get a notice. Bing, you have violated. We found a 100 kilogram emission. By day 5, you have to go out there and use OGI or some other method, Alt-AIM, to figure out, find it. By day 10, you got to fix it. And I'll tell you the most common things that would cause a 100 kilogram deal are cold venting. So a combustor not combusting because a pilot light went out or something. Tanks, pressure relief valve open up because it happens. Thief hatch opening, etc. So these will be big events. They will be caught from a satellite. So I liken this to you drove and a little light flashes on the freeway and you're like, ah, crud. A week later, it shows this ticket and says, here's a picture of your car with you behind the windshield. Please send me some money. Okay. By day 15, you basically have to report and either prove you're guilty until proven innocent. So you basically, if you could say, well, wait, you showed me a red dot over my site, but really that emission came from my next door neighbor, or it came from slurry coating the asphalt thing down the side. Like, what wasn't me? You got to prove it. If not, it goes on to the new EPA super emitter website. And then they talk about, if you get 3 of these notices, something bad will happen, but they don't tell you what. Okay. What I think everybody's fear would be, you get 3 of them and you get a consent decree. That would be the nastygram nobody wants. All right, so Appendix K, manual LDAR. I'll just cover 2 main things. And again, it applies to these gas processing plants, but you should be aware that Appendix K exists. It's a 10-page document that explains how you do an LDAR thing. But basically it'll say, hey, you gotta look at these particular EPA subpart W equipment. You gotta do 10 seconds of recording, 5-minute inspection overview. There's some delta T requirements, blah, blah, blah. And then they introduce the concept of a senior operator and a junior operator. Somebody's got 500 surveys under their belt or 140 hours of experience, or a junior operator is 32 hours under the supervision of a senior guy. I think this training requirement probably got a heap load of comments, because a lot of these people are like, wait a second, I've been doing LDAR for a long time and I don't, like, how do we qualify as senior and all kinds of stuff. So they sort of hit pause a little bit on that for everything other than gas processing plants. Okay, emissions inventory. So they allude to, there's going to be another brand of emissions inventory, but the Inflation Reduction Act introduced this idea of a future methane tax. Okay, and it's done, and it's set in such a way that, hey, if your state doesn't implement this new Quad OBC in a state implementation plan, then you, operator inside of that state, are subject to the future methane tax. The only way to avoid that is to 100% comply with Quad O, B, and C. So there's this future tax coming, okay? So what is this methane intensity reporting? What do you got to do to get there? Well, you start getting into some of the things that have been alluded to in OGMP, Oil and Gas Methane Partnership 2.0 level 5, where you have this concept of source level and site level actual measurements that are reconciled together. So if you were to look at this, you have bottoms up. So you're saying, hey, I can use actual measurements to measure source level emissions. I've got my LDAR report, which now tells me how long leaks were, presumably. And some people have done more frequent LDARs just so they get their leak duration down, right? Because that's part of your overall emissions. Then this idea of throughput, because I can't do a methane intensity unless I tell you what kind of throughput I got in that particular month, let's say. And then you got this idea of the methane intensity, okay, which would be the amount of fugitive methane I produced over the throughput, right? And so you have this top-down way that you need to reconcile this. They don't really tell you how to do all this. Colorado Reg 22 is putting something like this into place this year. So they're getting a lot more. Again, they're sort of like the R&D lab for where this is going, okay?
We are seeing quite a few voluntary LDAR. It used to be it's every 6 months, and we're seeing more and more either do it quarterly or monthly, depending on if it's near a school, if it's near a road. And so we're seeing the activity level of that LDAR increase significantly by certain players.
Sure. I mean, Colorado and New Mexico basically said you have to do it. Other people are doing more frequency. Yeah, either a combination of it's the right thing to do or it does impact your emissions inventory, because let's say you find a leak, a fugitive emission. Well, how long was it leaking? Well, the only way currently acceptable is to say it was leaking presumably since your last LDAR report. Well, if your last LDAR report was 6 months ago, then basically you got to go, well, here's the EPA formula times 6 months. I turn it in. Right now, there really is no downside. I turn in my emissions inventory. It's not like they tax me on it. So here you go. It's kind of a pain, but I turned it in. But if you had to calculate a methane intensity and multiply that by an actual dollar figure, all of a sudden now it takes on a whole new level of significance. Obviously, one of the advantages of continuous monitoring like CleanConnect provides is the leak duration could be seconds, provable with video. So, and we literally record the beginning and end of leaks and repairs and workflow in the whole 9 yards. So
I think any of that data, whether it's CleanConnect, the continuous automated, or the monthly voluntary, or whatever, it really helps create kind of best practices. That one of the things we see is the thief hatches. That's where 70-80% of the leaks are. Well, maybe you need to change out your gaskets more. Maybe you need to change out your thief hatches. It really highlights where your issues are, and if you want to make changes to improve, you can.
I have a episode, just a couple back on Digital Roughnecks, where I talked to a guy from Texas who's developed a particular device that tries to basically eliminate the methane out of a tank. It's a device that sits inside the tank, and we go in a ton of detail about how all that stuff happens, and the surge pressure that happens that may trigger a pressure relief valve and stuff like that. So if you really want to geek out on tank emissions, you can go back to Digital Roughnecks there. I won't go into this part, but the next part is, so some of the stuff that we had to do for Alt-AIM, which I think will apply in the future to EPA Alt-AIM, where you have to prove these 6, basically source level detection. So you have to show, hey, I could do source level detection, blind testing. We had to show equivalency. So Colorado made us show that our AI was equivalent to a human being doing monthly LDAR. And we used something called LDAR Sim to show this equivalency. You have to give an alt work practice for Alt-AIM. So say, hey, here's how I'm going to use it, versus manual LDAR. We had a couple operators endorse it, and we're currently going through EPA approval. That's what we are going
Mark,
through.
We've had a question from the audience about what takes your software to that level of artificial intelligence. And then something kind of related to that is the AI differentiating between leaks and venting.
Right. And I didn't, come in here to do a demo of CleanConnect per se, but I can describe it. So the technology we use is called computer vision. It by nature is AI. It is a subset of AI. There's machine modeling. Computer vision takes the input from cameras, runs it through different machine models to then identify things. Okay. So what makes it equivalent is exactly what I'm showing on the screen here, where we had to prove equivalency. So we had to do blind testing and with an operator, literally a production facility, who would release known emissions at various distances. So we can see, for example, a 2 kilogram per hour leak at 120 meters. Okay. And this is all blind testing. So our stuff's going and they're releasing leaks at various stuff. How do we tell the difference between a fugitive and a permitted deal? So our software allows the operator to set up tour stops. And the tour stops can be as granular as a piece of equipment or equipment group, okay? We allow you to then draw inclusion exclusion zones. So let's say you're looking at an ECD, a closed combustor device, and you say, hey, if emissions stay right there at the very top, that's cool. It's doing what it's supposed to do. But if volatile organic compounds come outside of that area, it's fugitive, right? So yeah, that's how we can tell, because we're visual, because we're continuous, because we're using the same OGI camera core as the guy doing manual LDAR. We use a FLIR G300A. It's the same core as the GF320. So, but ours is mounted 40 feet in the air in a military grade pan tilt unit that is specifically tuned to look at, much different. And I don't have all of the issues that the typical human has, where they're sitting on the ground 6 feet in the air, let's say 5 feet, pointing up, where they got sky in the background. That kind of messes with the deal. I'm pointing down, there's no sky in the background. I got known equipment behind, so I can get a really nice, as clear as possible image, 24/7, any kind of weather. Yeah.
Just as a, like I say, I'm confused about a lot of things, as my friends will admit, but especially on looking at the autonomous LDAR. But so how do you compare what y'all do? And it sounds like you use a OGI camera to do that versus some of the other options that use sensors and lasers and kind of the,
Yeah.
and I know we can't go into a lot of, maybe come back and we'll go into a lot more detail, but just, I think a lot of people are trying to figure that out and think through what the different options. So if maybe just a high level of what to think about.
When you're looking at fence line monitors, you have these PID sensors sitting on the fence. And so some sort of mission event happens, and the wind picks it up and takes it over to one sensor or the other. Then they use trigonometry to say, hey, I don't know exactly where it is, but somewhere in this triangle is this leak, okay, of approximately this size, okay? So what happens is then, so you're really relying on the wind, and I have specific examples where clients have provided side by side, and when you see it, so ours is visual. So like, let's say a client did a blowdown event. Okay, our thing picks it up. You see the actual event, right? You can even see the guy is sitting there, the maintenance guy is sitting on the site, right? It's visual. There's a video, and it does the same thing. It quantifies it all. With the other, you get a graph saying, hey, at this time, it spiked above 1 part per million, and it's somewhere in this area. Okay. Well, according to the EPA, in our deal, so the different work practice, the guy would look at that, get an alert, look at the video, and go, I know what it is. It was a maintenance event. Don't need to do anything. Okay. Dang ops forgot to tell the HSE crew that they were doing it. Oops. Because the HSE guy might have just sent out, what he had to do with a sensor is, all right, put a guy in a truck, drive out there with an OGI camera, go around and see if they can find the thing, right? Mm-hmm. So the big difference is with our setup is it's remote monitoring management, right? It's all remote. You see the leak, and in many cases, like if it was we have clients who they may see an emission event. Let's say cold venting, combustor not combusting. They can look at it and go, shoot, the pilot light went out. They can clearly see it. They can reboot it remotely. They see that the fire tube is firing up like it should. They record the whole thing. No guy got in a truck. No guy went out to the site. No guy got out his GF320, all done remotely. That's the big difference. Is probably 80% of the truck rolls that you would normally do gone.
The one thing, we do a lot of LDAR using OGI, so I'm a big believer in what you're just saying. The big deal though is cost. Those cameras aren't cheap. So I would assume that y'all using an OGI camera, that's a pricey alternative.
So two areas. One, we do it as a service. So nobody pays up front for the OGI camera. Okay. So it's done as part of it's combined with our software. So it's done as a service, which means we're constantly monitoring it. If there's a failure of any kind, we just hot swap it out and fix it. Right. So you don't have to worry about that. Cause a lot of people, those cooled cores only last like 8,000 hours, and we're continually monitoring it. We replace those all on that. So you don't have the upfront CapEx. Gotcha. Number two, when you combine it with the other machine models in our autonomous 365, that I think is where ops sees the big savings. So typically ops says, wait a second, all this other stuff combined, their big idea is I'm building on a new site. I don't hire any new people. So you start adding that. One of our operators said, hey, on these next 11 sites, I'm not going to hire any night operators. That will save me $60 million. So they had a 10x ROI. Okay. We have other ones that say, hey, I don't need the gate operators. I don't need this. I'm eliminating these truck rolls. So that's it. It's op savings that they're getting is how they're ultimately looking at it.
And this is a little strange, but to some degree, I thought the automated LDAR was almost kind of window dressing for some folks, that they were putting it on there. And so they were just having sensors just so they could say they have it. And it wasn't, it might be helping some, but I don't know. That's maybe just my own opinion, but what you're saying with Quad OB, Quad OC, there's really an economic benefit, regulatory benefit of doing more detailed surveying.
Yeah, I mean, there's a regulatory benefit, but if that was it, I mean, that's good in and of itself, but it's the operational benefit when you combine it with all the other things. For us, it's the ops benefit. That's where they see, when they're combining it with that, because not only are they not hiring new people to, as a variable cost of building out a new site, but they're able to take their most senior person and virtually clone them. One of our guys said, man, I can be literally on 15 sites at once. But not only, and if I was on that site, I could see at best at any given time a quarter of the site with my OGI camera. You can see the whole dang 360 degrees all the time, day and night. So it's like I'm duplicating myself, I'm cloning myself, and I'm on all these sites 24/7. And that's it. I mean, that's what they say. I can clone myself. And right now, finding and hiring qualified people is tough.
Some would say near impossible.
Yeah.
So
if you can generate your clone for a fraction of the cost, why not?
Well, Mark, we're running out of time. I know you've got several more graphs here, but
I think, just to sum it up, I think
please.
Really the impact of Quad OBC is the biggest impact would be the staffing and the call outs, right? It's I was looking at 1.6 million more LDAR inspections will need to happen. Okay, that's a few, right? The retrofits, obviously, replace all the pneumatics on Quad OC, and that's going to cost a bunch of money. The enforcement side of the super emitter, a lot of people, there's going to be some people, it's the bell curve. Some people are like, look, I'm going to do this. It's the right thing to do. Others are like, they'll never catch me anyway, right? I mean, what are the chances of the EPA with their OGI camera getting out to my site? Well, when they got a satellite that can see 100 kilogram per hour deal, they can go by every 2 days.
Well, it's not just the EPA that is doing that. You also have
EDF and
advocacies. You got university lands. Everybody's into looking at your business. So,
and I think the other thing too is really 2023. I think is the beginning of the transition from what I would say the EPA formulas to the actual measurements. So, and it will matter too. It's going to matter on two levels. One, it will matter just because, hey, you got to figure out your method intensity and start to measure that, right? Number two, it will matter come next year if you want to sell your natural gas and get it into LNG and get it sold to Europe. That has cap and trade rules that say, hey, I'm only buying gas that meets certain greenhouse gas numbers. So I'm not going to even buy it if you can't prove your methane intensity. So that's coming. So it's I put it as number 4, but it is coming, and you should be aware of that. So anyway, I think, for anybody who's interested in getting a copy of this and another video walkthrough, you just go to epacheatsheet.com.
Perfect.
Well, and Mark, you'll get an automatic email follow-up from me with my personal email address. So that's another way to get a hold of me. And, if you can always test me out on these things once you get your email, if you hit reply, I will respond.
There you go. So you're a real person.
I'm a real person. I will answer any of these questions because there's a lot of stuff in here. Again, 1,438 pages. I just summarized as 16 the best I could. I'm not a lawyer. I am not going to sit there and, I did this purely just because there was just so many people that needed to get up to speed on this. And I did it as a favor to the industry, really.
Well, you've got job security because there is going to be a lot of confusion, and EPA will help do its part by continuing to change and as you alluded to, keep things mysterious enough so it's hard for the operator to really know what they have to do. Ambiguity reigns in this whole process. So, Mark, thank you very much. Hopefully everyone that provides you at least some additional information, a resource that you can go to with Mark's efforts. And then if we could ever help you out at OTI Environmental Solutions, look for us as well. And thank y'all, and look forward to Jim Wright at our next presentation, and then James Kinney will be loading that on as well in February. Mark, thank you. Everyone, take care.
Thanks, Grant. See ya.